back to another episode of ACA Cast with your host this week, Alex Zito. ACA Cast is the official podcast of ACA International, the leading voice of the accounts receivable management industry. Before we start today's episode, the content is presented for general references only. On today's episode, we're going to discuss tips for getting the most out of the industry conferences. Here's a conversation with ACA's Collector Magazine Managing Editor Ann Russell May and Michael Lamm. He's the Managing Partner at Corporate Advisory Solution, LLC. Enjoy.
One of the questions that keep coming up a lot by executives, future leaders in the industry is budgeting and getting ready for which conferences, trade shows, events to go to in 2020. Marketing and sales dollars continue to get decline in terms of folks where they're spending money and the travel and everything that's associated with it. But these conferences and trade shows, even those the ones that ACA puts together, are extremely valuable. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the importance of these trade shows, why you need to have some of your up-and-comers coming to these conferences and trade shows if it isn't already obvious to you.
So, Michael, I know budgets are tight and travel can be expensive. Do you have any suggestions for online opportunities as far as networking and professional development?
Yeah, great way to start off. So from my vantage point, there are a lot of ACA's got this with their education forums online that could be easily accessible. If you can't, or budgets are tight where you can't send somebody to a conference or trade show for a couple of days because this the time out of the office will be challenging, I would urge you, those online tutorials and those forums and webinars and things like that are great. They're easy, but the key is to allow the folks in your organization the time and effort to listen in, because I'll tell you, when I'm sitting at my desk, I've got a lot of distractions, email, phone calls, people coming in and out, and that is something that if you don't block out the time, you're only really hearing, a quarter to maybe 40% of what's actually being shared with you during those online sessions, which is why when I think about 2020 for folks, getting somebody out of the office so they can go to these conferences and trade shows, meet some of the key executives, see what other people are doing, talk about some of the technology, the new technology that's coming into the space. To me, that face-to-face kind of interaction and a networking trade show concept is just, it brings back more momentum into the organization when that individual comes back. So I would tell you that you've got to always be picking and choosing what events and where to go and what's going to give you the best return. But getting people out of the office sometimes sparks a lot more thoughts on ways to help grow, enhance, and make businesses in our industry more efficient.
Do you recommend any kind of debriefing that companies can do when they send employees to these events to see what they learned?
Yeah, great question. What I like to see is when somebody goes out, especially somebody that's not been out at trade shows or conferences, that they go with a colleague, somebody that's been there and done it before, so they're able to kind of shadow them and see what events they go to, what sessions they listen into, and information that they're trying to gather, and people they frankly are trying to meet and they could network through. And that's kind of point number one, but the debrief is just as important. I always tell people the sooner you can get your thoughts down on paper of what lessons you learned or what industry trends you heard about, so you can get it written down in email and get it out to the rest of your group, the more efficient the time is. Because by the time you get back into the real world of being back from the trade show, you're back into the day-to-day grind, and you don't necessarily have the time to go sit back, take everything you learned, and then write it and send it out to everybody. So the more you could communicate as soon as you get back, my rule is always I always try to do that within a 24-hour window, and then that way it gets out to everybody, so everyone else who didn't attend the show or meeting can get the flavor of what things came up or what was interesting and what trends are happening in the space.
Do you have any suggestions for employees who maybe have never attended an event before? What kind of case can they make to their supervisors to get sent to these?
When you think about the value proposition and that if that individual is committed to the industry, I think it becomes a pretty easy sell, especially if, for example, if the individual is in the technology area of the business and the event or trade show is directly in their wheelhouse from a just day-to-day operations perspective. It's a much easier sell to say, look, this conference is a day out of the office, but here's all the stuff that's going to come from it. And I think the more you could set it up that way, easier getting that registration fee out of the marketing budget to make it happen. But I think that's a key way of describing it. The other thing is that a lot of these conferences and trade shows are becoming, they're not all going to be in the most expensive city imaginable. We're seeing a lot more conferences and trade shows. I don't know if you're seeing this too, Ann, is that they're happening in the Midwest. So, and a lot of these companies, a lot of the ACA membership they are in the Midwest too. So having things that are easy to get to, where somebody could go in for 24 hours to a networking meeting or a trade show, makes the decision making a lot easier internally on whether they're going to spend the money or not.
Do you have any tips on how people can best prepare to go to conferences to get the most out of the event?
So a lot of things are changing in the conference scene where a lot of the data and information is being provided in advance of the trade show. So the presentations, the marketing literature on vendors, and the registration list. And a lot of that's being provided via apps on your phone. So you could literally download everything before you even show up. And obviously you could look to see which sessions or meetings or networking events are going to be the most effective and informational for you and your group. And I think the more you can do in advance of going, in terms of setting up meetings with vendors, meeting with other folks from the different trade associations, depending on who's putting on the event, and then obviously making sure that you've identified the sessions and the speakers that you really want to hone in on. And that preparation is invaluable in making a conference productive and that you can demonstrate a return on the investment back to your team.
If a company is sending an employee who has never been to a conference like this before, do you have any advice on how they can get connected to attendees if they don't know anyone else at the event?
Yeah, so this is where it's kind of like the buddy system, right? It's kind of funny, but when you think about it, if somebody else from the organization has already been, and even though there's a cost now for 2 people to go, and there's a new person who's never been before, I will tell you, if they've got another person that's been there to the conference or trade show before, it's going to be much more effective for that person. Because I've met a lot of people that go to conferences that are brand new to the industry and to just attending a show. Walking into a room where a lot of people already know each other can be a little daunting because you're just walking into kind of its own network and you've got to break in. Now, that's why I like the buddy system concept. Now, if that is not an option where you're going, a lot of the conferences and trade shows will put on events for newbies. So people that have never been to the show before, kind of like an ambassador where they could kind of help them get to meet people, get to the right places, so it becomes less daunting because you're kind of got somebody there that's on the ground helping you make the conference successful. Start thinking about which conferences and trade shows you and your team may want to go to. What are the costs? Where are they? where are the shows? Could you have other meetings in and around those conferences to make it productive? And start figuring out which ones are going to give the best return on the investment from a learning, education, and networking perspective. And I think if you think about those kind of key themes out of the gate, 2020 conference attendance and networking should be improved for you because you now have a game plan on what shows you may or shows you or your team may or may not go to.
That sounds great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael and Ann. If you're interested in learning more about ACA's event this year, just go to acainternational.org/events. You can subscribe to ACA Cast on iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we appreciate our ratings on iTunes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on ACA Cast.